Hi, this is Megan from Bath Garden Center. Today's video is going to be about composting and how to do that at your house. So where you want to start your compost, you can do it in a bin. A lot of people do it in like your Home Depot containers or a small like trash can, whatever works for you. You could also start it on the ground, which is really good for it as well. When starting your compost pile, you want to do a layer of sticks or straw to kind of help aerate it and provide oxygen and also help it drain really well while you're layering more composty ingredients on top of that. And when you are making a compost, you want to have a good balance of dry materials to moist and wet materials to kind of maintain the proper moisture level in your compost, as well as the nitrogen and carbon levels that your ingredients are going to provide. When composting, nitrogen and carbon levels are going to be really important. Your carbon is going to come from your branches, your twigs, your natural matter like your woodsy brown kind of things. Your grass clippings are also part of that. So those are going to be a really big important key to your compost. As far as the nitrogen levels in your compost, that's going to be more of your eggshells and your coffee grounds and your banana peels. The ratio between carbon and nitrogen should really be 2/3 carbon to 1/3 nitrogen. It's not going to be exact, but you can eyeball it, kind of keep in mind what you've been putting into your compost bin, what is something that you're putting in more than the other. Make sure that it's more carbon than it is nitrogen. Too much nitrogen is going to cause your compost pile to be more stinky, to slowly decompose rather than kind of quicken the process. Either way, your compost bin is going to not smell super great because it's got decomposing things inside of it, but more nitrogen is going to make it more smelly. Some things you can't put in your compost bin that some people might think is okay because it is just a natural thing. You can't put your meats inside of the compost bin. You can't put bones inside of it. It just attracts more animals and pests to your compost bin, and you don't want that. You want it to stay nice and together and kind of decompose in the period of time that it needs to. Some other things you can't put in your compost bin are going to be your perennial weeds. They are going to create more weeds in your soil if you use weeds in your compost. So don't put your perennial weeds or other weeds inside of your compost bin. You also want to avoid any kind of diseased plants from going into your compost bin. Again, you don't want it transferring to the plants that you want to consume or enjoy outside. So make sure you're investigating the plants that you're putting inside of your compost bin and be aware that diseases from your plants can transfer to your other plants. For keeping the moisture and to help kind of that smell, reduce the smell, you can cover your compost. You should cover your compost. It's really important to retain that moisture as well as to kind of protect it from being overwatered from natural weather like rain. So protect it with a cover and keep that moisture inside of the compost bin or on your pile. So you want to turn your compost pile because it adds aeration to your compost so that it can grow more bacteria that it needs to grow, so that it can drain better, so that it's just mixing all the nitrogen and the carbon together. So it's really important that you do turn your compost, if it's on the ground or something like that, or it's in a big bin that doesn't have the turning mechanism that some compost bins have. You can use a rake, you can use a stick, you can use whatever you need to use to kind of mix that whole compost pile together, and so that it's got a really good mixture of the nitrogen and carbon that it needs. So once your compost pile is established and you're using your compost for your raised garden bed or whatever it is, and you still have your compost and you're still kind of composting, you still need to add your dry ingredients and more wet ingredients as you're using it to keep it continuing to form as a compost rather than let it kind of die out. So that's what you want to do with your established compost pile if you're still working on it. In order to find out if your compost is established, you can check by seeing if it's like a rich dark color. If you don't see so much matter anymore from like the eggshells or from your fruits. If everything has kind of been decomposed and consumed by the compost and bacteria that it's created, then that's a really good indicator that your compost is ready. Another one is once it stops smelling so much like rotting food and rotting vegetables, that's a good indicator that it's kind of decomposed everything and it's getting more established and almost done. You also are looking for kind of a crumbly soil and not something that has a bunch of chunks of leftover things or whatever you were adding to your compost. So make sure it looks like a nice, dark, rich soil. It will look like that. And make sure it's not super stinky or smelly or moldy or something like that. So use a nice, fresh compost, and that's how you're gonna tell if it's established. You do not need to use all your compost for one garden bed or for an area. You want to mix that compost with the soil. So 1/3 compost to 2/3 existing soil or topsoil, whatever it is. If you use just your compost, it's going to be too much nitrogen and carbon directly onto your plants that it's potentially going to burn your plant. So make sure you're mixing that in really well with some already existing soil, and continue your compost bin or your pile by adding more of your dry and your moist ingredients. So we do have a product called Compost Maker. A lot of people sell compost makers, those kinds of inoculants that kind of help kickstart your compost. So this is just going to be like something that you can add into your compost to kind of help it going. You can also use manure for those kinds of things. It just helps it kind of get it into gear. So you can use manure, you can use these guys, just something that's rich in nitrogen. So when using manure, you want to use a cow manure or like a chicken manure, something that is eating a lot of nitrogen, something that's rich in nitrogen. You can't just use your cat's poop or your dog poop or those kinds of other manures. They're consuming different things that their poop is going to release different kinds of nutrients and those kinds of different things that your plant is really not going to need and it's not going to thrive off of. So make sure you're sticking with chicken, cow manure, those kinds of things that are safe to put in your garden and then consume. Thanks again for watching our video. If you have any questions about composting or any questions about plants at all, we're more than happy to help.